Besides being a workhorse of this fellowship and an utterly indispensable member, the Reverend Susan Thomas is a pastor who serves on the pastoral council. She has previously served on the fellowship's board of directors and as a Sunday school teacher. Susan has been an active member of the fellowship since a month after Paul Solomon moved to Virginia Beach from Georgia in 1973. She is an Inner Light Consciousness guide, and she is currently our office manager, newsletter editor, and housekeeper of the church. Her main ministries have been and are motherhood, performing, teaching, and composing music. She recognizes and embraces music as a healing vehicle. Please help me welcome Reverend Susan Thomas.
Hello. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you today, the people in this room, the people Zooming, the people that will see this later. For those of you who do not know, I've been with the Fellowship of the Inner Light since 1 month after Paul Solomon moved here from Georgia. And it's like thinking of a past life. It was so long ago, 51 years, but it's a blink of an eye. And it was in 73, the spring of 73. I was 24 years old. And I'm just amazed at, whoa, how could those many years go by? But I'm so thankful. I'd like to start by saying I'm so thankful to be a part of this spiritual family and to be fellow sojourners with all of you here. I'm going to be sharing some of my inspirations that came from Paul Solomon and some of my experiences with him. And one of the things he encouraged in all of us was to open to whatever creative forces come through you from the stream of consciousness in whatever form, and to begin to hear that voice and trust it and express it. And so one of the ways that I feel the most connected with Source is through music. And he was always so encouraging to people, no matter what they did, writing, music, art, cooking, whatever the thing is you do. And so before I share these little vignettes of some things he's done and read a few of his words, I thought I would take about 2 minutes on the piano just to play a little bit of something I already composed, but what I'm going to do is open to an improvisation on it based on feeling all of you in this room. Okay, each of you are a sacred being, and there's a note for your soul, or there's a song for your soul, a song from the universe that comes through you. And so I'm looking around and I'm seeing all the love in your faces. And so I'm going to courageously go and do this for about 2 minutes. Put this up here because I don't need it. I won't be reading. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'll start with referring to the fact that my children grew up in this church. And Aaliyah's children grew up in this church, and other people that are here and that are listening. And we all worked with the Sunday school here. And my children were greatly, greatly influenced by the Fellowship of the Inner Light, for which I'm very grateful. And they are very grateful. And as the adults they are now, at age 43 and 47, how can that be? They continue to bring it up and say they're so grateful to have been raised in this kind of environment. They both, at the current time, enjoy doing the Seven Terraces meditation. And James Yax is here. They have his print of the Seven Terraces in frames on their walls at their homes in Santa Cruz, California, and in Brooklyn, New York. And they both informally share about inner light consciousness and that meditation with some of their friends and some of their family. And the people that they know are asking them more and more about all of this. And so through these different venues of expressing it, it has touched them, and it indirectly or directly touches the people that they touch. I think we all need to be reminded that all these beautiful things are born here, seeds are planted, and we're coming in and working with it, but it ripples out. There are no limits. Your prayers are powerful, and spiritual energies are not limited to time and space. They ripple out, and they touch anyone that's having a holy moment. And so if somebody says, well, there's only 3 people here for something, no, it just means there's 3 people in an experiential unit right now working with something. It doesn't mean there's only that happening. It's not just in these walls, okay? Because it's in people's hearts and souls, and everyone you touch is affected by anything loving and good that's happening in you. And it's good to remind each other of that. Very good. And Paul liked to remind us of that. He once said at a lecture here, I remember many years ago, what we just had in this room, and everybody was feeling peaceful and healed. He said probably a certain mile radius, people are feeling stuff in their houses and they wonder why they feel so good. Because it goes out of the walls and into the neighborhood and the planet, the universe. How do we know how far it goes? Because consciousness has no time and space. So it's one of the things he reminded us of that I really appreciate. I'm blessed with a whole lot of memories of healing and events through the years. And so I'm going to share just a few memories today and inspirations from Paul Solomon, our founder. Now, you've already throughout this whole gathering heard all kinds of stories and wonderful, insightful stories about Paul and about the church. And all of us here have had some similar experiences with each other and with Paul. Now, in my opinion, Paul Solomon was a human being. He was a man and a divine being. And he reminded us that all people are divine beings. He told me that he used to think that his main purpose was to teach meditation techniques. He said, indeed, it is a part of his purpose, but it was not his main purpose. He realized that these are useful spiritual tools to use, but he said to me, my main purpose that I realize now in life was to simply teach people how to love themselves and each other, and to teach people what love really is as he grew in these expressions himself. Paul told me this just a few weeks before he passed away, and it stayed with me. To all these wonderful techniques lead you to those places, but don't get caught up in just the mental part. We've mentioned that before throughout the gathering. Go to the heart of the matter. think with your heart. As a man is in his heart, he is. Now, I think those of you who knew Paul, I see several of you out here, know that there were many facets to Paul's personality. And to describe them, I think, would be like trying to lasso the wind. You know, there are just so many. And he taught people with wit and wisdom and compassion. And sometimes he would leave us with very annoying and nagging questions to answer. Some people wanted him to stay away from finding or pushing their buttons. He would sometimes do this with students, people he was close with, just to help them, to assist them with any changes and understandings that they needed. And so I began to wonder when we talked about pushing buttons as an exercise in the classes, were people going to start wearing T-shirts that didn't have any buttons because, you don't want one. You're kind of going, oh, please don't push any more buttons. I often attended lectures and classes where I had questions in my mind and my heart, but I almost never asked them out loud because Paul would start talking, and it might not even be the subject he was originally talking about, and he would answer them all. I think he really knew how to read an audience. He really knew how to read a congregation. And Aaliyah shaking her head, yes, we've seen it many times, could walk right in a room and sense things and go there and boldly open his mouth and let something come out.
I remember in the beginning we'd say, wow, Paul just answered that question right to me. And someone said, well, nobody answered my question.
Exactly.
Would all get their questions answered.
Exactly. And many of us, when we would even read something that he wrote or study his readings, we had the experience where it would seem that the reading was for us personally, because there were so many universal truths in the material and well-timed as it would come out of his mouth, in those sessions. And he was amazed at it himself, because he had the courage for that to come out. Judith has something she'd like to say.
Just on this subject, if you don't mind, in England, I was organizing conferences.
You come up here, Judith, so they can hear what you're going to say.
Just very quickly.
Yeah, that's okay. No, this is very interactive because we're all part of this. Yes.
Because I was organizing these big conferences from him very often, and there were big weekend ones, and there'd be breaks and lunch breaks and whatever. So I would always stand at the back listening to what he was saying, and then I'd be checking that I'd have to go and check with the hotel whether they were bringing it, whatever. And I remember he was right in the subject matter where I was going, it's like something really interesting I wanted to do. And then I looked at my time, I just looked at the clock or something, and I nipped out. He was on a thread when I left. When I came back in, he was on a totally different thread, nothing related to this. But as I came in the door, he literally swept back because I had in my mind, I wonder there was a question I had. He literally it was just so seamless and totally answered exactly what I wanted when I came back in. It was like, what?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing indeed. And I think a lot of us found that, when we would read something that we'd already seen a lot through the years, it could be a lecture or a portion of a reading, it would take on a newer meaning and expression in our current lives as if we'd never seen it before. I think most of us could agree we've experienced that kind of thing. I want to mention, Karen mentioned Dr. Bill Kelly. Now, he was on a trip that I took in the fall of 1976. It was Paul's first trip to the Holy Lands. Mary Elizabeth Marlowe was on that trip. Sharon Solomon, she's back, yay. Sharon Solomon was on that trip. And a whole lot there were 30 people, and Sharon always likes to say, 30 people went with me on my honeymoon, because what a whirlwind. I planned my wedding in 6 days, and we left 2 days later for a 15-day tour of Egypt, Israel, Greece, and a side trip to Syria and Jordan. But anyway, what a whirlwind, right? And I was also 3 months pregnant at the time. Not the best time to travel, but in spite of that, what an amazing trip. And I wanted to share about there were many stories. You could be here all day hearing them, but I only want to tell you about one because that really came to me thinking about it this week. We went to the Great Pyramids, in Giza in Egypt. And we got alone time, just our group, in the king's chamber. He did a reading in the so-called sarcophagus, And he got out, and I was standing way near the back, and I was always very shy or quiet about speaking up. And somebody else had their leg already going into the sarcophagus, and it came out in my mouth like it was somebody else's voice. I must get in there now. I'm like, I couldn't believe he goes, Susan needs to get in there now. And so I had no preconceived notion, except that I had had a dream 6 months before at night where I was pregnant, and it seemed important to have a pyramid over me. So, and I was pregnant, but I didn't know that 6 months earlier, right? So all these pieces were amazingly coming together. I felt very blessed. How did I even manifest this? I'm on this trip. And so I laid down in the sarcophagus, and the best way I can describe this, and it's never been quite like that before, never before, and not exactly since. In that moment, it was like E.T. goes home. In that moment, all I felt like was nothing but whirring energy, vibration, electrical. All I felt, I can't even describe it. It was vibrating, my whole being, and I could have just kept going, but he touched me on right here in the third eye and said a prayer, and I jolted back and got out. And if memory serves me, Sharon, you got in next. We don't know what happened. We still can't remember. But the two of us then ended up standing outside of the so-called sarcophagus. And we don't know where he went, but we kept helping people get in it, as if this had somehow been preordained. It was very mystical, wasn't it, Sharon? Very mystical. And prior to the reading and everything, we had all chanted Om together in this very strong, sacred place. So I'm grateful to have had that experience and led by Paul Solomon, who very wisely was kind of a temple guard for everybody, having more experience with it himself. So grateful for that. And in Israel, on the same trip, we stopped in Cana, and people said, they're going to bless your wedding in Cana, because that's where he turned the water into wine, Jesus. But the focus Paul had was, bless the product of your union. And I never forgot that. I told Leah about it, And then speaking of Leah, she's my oldest. She's 47 now, and she has a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. But when she herself was not even quite 3, like a lot of little kids, she got thrush, and had a fever and all these things in her mouth. And I was holding her in the rocking chair. And can somebody close some of those doors? They all just came open. And thank you. It just feels like the right thing to do. Okay, thank you. So anyway, Leah was very sick, and she was getting sicker. So I called where Billy was. He was at somebody's place with Paul and with David Solomon. Next thing I know, Paul Solomon and David Solomon came with Billy to our apartment at Bird Neck Apartments. And as soon as Leah, she was in my lap being comforted by Mama, as soon as she saw Paul, she just sat up and said, "What should I do?" So he comes over and he looks at her and smiles and kind of touches her. And he said, "She must have chocolate milk." It was the only thing that would soothe. She couldn't even drink water. It was the only thing that worked and would be appealing to the child, And so, but what was funny, 6 months later, we're out of chocolate milk, Mom. Paul Solomon said, I should have chocolate milk. So there was this constant she referred to him. She sensed what a presence he was when he was giving in those ways. And she trusted it as a child, but also a very convenient thing to, say that he insists, I must have it. And Leah had a funny thing, my daughter Leah had a funny thing with Paul when I was pregnant with Jenny. okay? Leah is almost 4 years older than Jenny. And while I was pregnant, she kept telling Billy and I that my sister Jennifer's coming. And back then, we didn't do the ultrasound. They were just starting to do it, and we didn't know the sex of the child. But she told me, my sister Jennifer is coming. So she told Paul that, and he teased her. He goes, I think you have a brother coming. And Leah would go, nope, it's my sister Jennifer. And then a few weeks after she was born and we came here and she saw him, she goes up, little 4-year-old, puts her hands on her hips. She goes, Mr. Paul Solomon, I told you my sister Jennifer was coming. And he just laughed and he loved it because it was just this joking camaraderie he had with her, and they connected. It was very sweet. And then Jennifer had an experience with him when she was about three, and I went to a hotel. Sharon might remember this. I think I was picking you up probably, and there had been an occasion there, and David Solomon was packing up Paul's things and bringing it down to the lobby, and he had a bunch of shoes sitting there. Well, she didn't know who David Solomon was, and she saw him. She knew they were Paul's shoes, and she saw David Solomon go over there and start taking the shoes. Well, she's this little tiny kid. She starts screaming like we didn't know what was wrong. Why is she suddenly having a children's, breakdown, a tantrum, whatever you want to call it? And it was so distraught and so loud that for her sake and the rest of the lobby, I tried to take her. I thought I'll take her outside and see if I can calm her down. And I could barely hold her. She's kicking and screaming. And Paul saw this. He followed us outside, and she didn't even tell him yet. And he goes, Jennifer, it's okay. Those are my shoes, and my friend is putting them in the car. And she, at the time, had a blanket. She called her nanny blanket, and she held it. You remember that, Analea? She said to Paul, I think you need a nanny blanket. So he took her to his car, and he opened the trunk. Stephen Haslam had bought a blanket for him in Scotland. He said, I want you to see my special blanket. And so she looked at it, and she goes, that's wonderful. Be sure you use that, And so he had this very tender heart that came out and very tuned in with children. And those memories are very sweet indeed. Now, Paul sometimes, like Judith was saying, he was reading our minds, at times. And it was amazing and laughable. One time he was doing a talk, and the gist of it was he was given an image of what would happen if a bunch of Christs started popping up all over the world. And for some reason, it hit a joyous funny bone in me and in him. And we looked at each other. He knew I felt that, and he did. We were laughing hysterically, and people were looking at us like, what's so funny? And we finally stopped laughing, and then he said something, and then everybody was laughing. It was just pure joy, which brings me to my favorite, if he did nothing else, that Biha, I need no excuse to experience and express pure joy. And when that happened, that was unifying with everybody and very magical. And I know Sharon will remember this with the Japanese. When they were over here, he would do his little talk, or part of it, and he'd say something funny. And all of us that spoke English were cracking up, the whole room laughing. Then the laughter would die down. The translator that would then turn to the Japanese and tell it. And we're looking at them, and they did the same thing. And it was just something special about that. And we realized laughter's the same in every language. Once it happens and it goes to that real place, it's very special. Now, Paul encouraged us to also be aware that when your light is shining very brightly, or your organization's light is shining very brightly, sometimes moths are drawn to the flame. And so we need to be aware of that, not be afraid of it, but just be aware of it. And meet the challenge to be vigilant in maintaining the light and to set healthy boundaries, personally and for an organization. And do our best to not get into the energy of the disturbed person. I'm going to read one little thing that Paul has said that I think is important now that he might want to say about us or to us. This is something he said at a family gathering in 1991. And it's applicable to now. He said, these are his words, "There will never be more than a handful of initiates on this earth at any given time because we get distractions, too many other things to do, other ambitions, other ways to look when you set your foot on the path. You can look to the right or the left. Even a glimpse can take you off the path. You could see something that for a second you want more, and that's enough to take away the impetus for that next initiation. There will be some who will get to the top of the mountain, and when they do, they will heal the cleft in the brain that separates it into two halves that argue with each other. And they will build neurons of light between the two hemispheres of the brain that will connect it into one unit, a cap, a crown of enlightenment. And that crown of enlightenment will turn into a pool with radiating light that reaches out into the mind of God. And that person will know the mind of God and know what he needs to know. The Fellowship of the Inner Light is a mystery school. It is both exoteric and esoteric. Those who discover the esoteric path will always be few because the tremendous dedication, commitment, sacrifice that is required is beyond even the wildest imagination of the average human. The path was described by one ancient being as a path that you have to follow knowing that there's fiery serpents around your feet and their bite can kill. But you must walk through that valley of vipers with your eyes looking up, never daring to look down once at the dangers around your feet. Can you do it? Can you walk with your eyes up, never looking down at all the stuff that's going on, individuals taking pot shots at each other and at you, and all the things that you can find fault with? Hate, fear, these are the vipers, the little foxes around your feet. Are you going to look down at them and criticize them for being there around your feet, a threat to every step you take? If so, your eyes are on the eyes of hell, and you walk the valley of death, and it will not lift you to the top of the mountain. Finding fault will not get you there. Finding fearsome things and problems, reasons and excuses why you cannot be holy will not get you there. For you are all prophets, every single one of you, and your prophecies are self-fulfilling. When you say the world is a troubled, dark place getting worse every day, this could be a fulfillment of your prophecy. Now, those who do open the door to the inner school will find that the school of prophets already exists. And everything that needs to be taught in that school is already there as well, in place. Except it is placed before you like rubble, like stones, not one standing on another but lying about in random. It is your task to gather each stone and put it in its place until you have built a temple, stone by stone, one stone at a time. Then you must place in the corner the keystone that holds it all together. This is the stone that the builders rejected. Was that the Christ, as so many have said? It was and is, but more importantly, you must understand who is the Christ, for he whom you are most likely to reject is not Jesus of Nazareth. He is easy to believe. The one who is hard to believe in is yourself. That is the cornerstone that the builders rejected, and it is the one you are most likely to reject. But if you do not take that cornerstone and put it in the most important place in the temple, you will not erect the temple, the home of the mystery school. So you get to build the temple yourself, stone by stone. The instructions are there, the opportunity is there, the commitment can come from you. And it says you need not judge the teachers you have. God is capable of even taking the most babbling of fools and teaching you where to put the next stone. Are you ready to listen? The student always builds the mystery school. If you are ready to pick up the stones and hew them to the right and make them perfect, you can erect them on this sacred mountain that will lift you up to the place of initiation. At the apex, you can add the capstone. You can experience initiation, enlightenment, the crown of enlightenment, and direct experiential knowledge of God. Without a doubt, it is available to you, always open to you. And the important thing is only you can open the door. So let us all open the door and open to the presence of the Christ, for he is here, and we can invite the Christ to enter within. That was powerful words from Paul. So I thank Paul Solomon for his inspiration and his teachings and his readings, and for bringing us all together to be fellow sojourners and family, spiritual family. Thank you so much.